Hello, I'm Iolani Halusky, the naturalist for St. Johns County Parks and Rec, and I'm out here with my friend James Bullock, and we're talking about telling the story. Like, history is a story. And how do you interpret the story to folks that have never been here, or newcomers that are just arriving? Or how about even folks that have lived here all their lives that have still no idea about what St. Johns County beyond the St. Augustine is like and what the history is all about? And James is, I would call him an expert. How you doing, James?
Hi.
I know you're humble and you don't like to hear that, but I would have to tell you, you are an expert of being in the story world. Tell me a little bit about that.
For me, I was more open as a heart when I would come across stories that I had not heard before. So as an adult, I said, how did I not know this? Because maybe if I had known this, I would have lived my life differently. Maybe I would have understood someone else's path in life. So I began to work with two different concepts. One was that if you knew everything, there's no reason to be alive. And that the
True.
more I began to learn, the more I realized how much I didn't know.
Right.
There was not a day that passed that I wouldn't say I didn't know that. The next part, though, is very ancient wisdom that most would say was Native American. That you cannot judge a person until you walked a mile in their shoes. So I began to ask the question, is perhaps that's why most of us as modern people don't resonate with history, is because it seems very remote and distant. And the shoes that we wear aren't like their shoes. And in fact, a subtle reminder that a few hundred years ago, the average person didn't have shoes. And I began to see a lot of these juxtapositions where we've come so far to have gone from, as my grandfather said, having a refrigerator was unheard of.
Right.
You buried your food in the ground.
And that kept it cool.
Right? You didn't have electricity, you had a lamp. So these technological changes have, in a sense, outpaced us to the point where they've taken all of our imagination. We stopped looking back at our ancestors as being possible teachers. In our previous generations, you had 3 or 4 generations in the same house, and the grandparents would play that role. The modern world, that's not happening, and people are scattered all over the country. But I realized that the core of these stories generally was the same.
Right.
That there was a group of people who were stuck. They didn't know how to move forward. They didn't know how to make things better. And they waited or called for a hero. Now in our world, we've begun to think that a hero is not even human. They've got to be Iron Man or
Superman.
Superwoman, or whereas I began to see more in history that those heroes were actually everyday people.
Like Stetson Kennedy.
Yes, and people that it was their conscience that pushed them.
Or Martin Luther King.
It was something that they saw that they had to speak out about, or they had to lay their life on the line about. So I felt that that experience, if I went to the core of it, those people would help me tell the story.
Okay.
So as a reenactor, at a certain point when I'm with our audience or our guest, it's no longer James.
Right.
If I'm at Fort Mose and I have the honor to portray Captain Francisco Menendez, then I'm in the 1730s. And I'm thinking about how did we get into a situation where countries and kings across the ocean
That's right.
are determining our future? And how will a tiny place against all odds survive? But he knows the answer because he knows his friends and neighbors. And if I'm at this park or throughout Florida portraying Abraham, who was an advisor to many of the Seminole chiefs, he would have been known as a cense bearer. I began to realize how difficult a road that was to bear, for him to try and protect the lives of people of African descent and have his best interest for his native allies. These were stories that to me spoke of compromise, they spoke of adaptation, they spoke of sheer will and determination, but seldom did they speak of a single muscle-bound hero who rode into town and saved the day. Whatever comes in the future, we are the heroes that are going to save or not save this world. And you're going to need refreshment for your soul, which I believe comes from the stories of our ancestors.
Beautiful.
They want us to remember. And I have to say in my own life that if I'm ever thinking, oh, James, my life has gotten so hard, all I have to think about is my grandparents.
That's right.
My whole life has not been as hard as a day in their life.
That's right.
Not even a day. And they told me things about a world that existed before I was born that, unless I had heard it from them, would have seemed inconceivable. What I think a reenactor allows us to do is pull you into the story so that you begin to see and feel it. They're not there to tell you the lesson or the moral or what you should or shouldn't have done. The result, though, is that you realize that, wow, if I had gotten off of a really crammed boat into a new world, how overwhelming that would have been, whether I was free or a slave. So, from walking in the footsteps of others, I felt we were able to teach ourselves, and that food for our souls grows when we plant it in our communities. So I think reenactors in history play a very important role in who we are as a society.
I almost would say they are the modern heroes.
They are the modern heroes. What if there had not been a George Washington or a Martin Luther King?
Yep.
Now, these are people that we consider great, but they were born just like we were.
Well, let's talk about some other things. I so appreciate what wisdom that you have to share, and you're kind of a storehouse of information for St. Augustine. It's very important, I would say, in this area. Thank you, James, for sharing.
Thank you so much.